Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new semester. This is Dr. Nick Burton. I'm the instructor for SPMA3P25 Sports Sponsorship, uh, which we're getting started today. I'm sorry that today's session and this week's content is all online. I'm currently away at a research conference and won't be back until week two. So rather than missing the entire week, I wanted to get us started quickly and have a quick little overview of the key points of the syllabus, the key concepts of the course in which we were headed, so that starting in week two, we can hit the ground running and get started. The focus of the course is what I'll try to focus most of my attention on today. I'll try to be as quick and brief as possible, but I will go through some of the key points of the syllabus. And then we'll talk through very quickly why sports sponsorship is important and where we're headed with the semester, and then we'll wrap up there. Let's get started. You may have noticed on the title screen there the word strategic. The focus of the semester and the way in which I'm going to be teaching sports sponsorship is with a view to strategy, thinking about sponsorship as not only a form of marketing, not only as a form of marketing communications, not only as a important source of revenue for sport organizations and really unique and interesting part of marketing within sport, but also as a strategic component of sport business, a hugely important and strategic part of relationships within sport, and a genuinely unique and discrete form of marketing and relationships that encompasses multiple stakeholders. And I point this out for a couple of reasons. One, when we talk about sponsorship and as we talk through the semester, we're going to be looking at sponsorship from a number of different perspectives. We're going to be taking the perspective of the sport organizations or properties who serve as sponsees in a relationship. We're going to be looking at it from the context of the sponsors themselves, the brands who pay money to associate with these organizations. We're going to be looking at it from the context of intermediaries, third parties, so sponsorship agencies or brokers who help navigate and manage these relationships. And we're going to focus a lot on that term, relationships, looking at how we manage and construct and develop and find value in the relationships that are constructed by these different stakeholders. I'm also going to set out and make very clear that a lot of what I talk about and the way in which I present this over the course of the semester will be through the context of professionalized or commercialized sport. And I think that's a really important caveat to make, and one that I wanted to make early here before I lose your attention and everybody closes the link. Because I think it's important to caveat that the examples I provide, the situations that I talk about, the partnerships that we look at and discuss, many and most will encompass professional sport, major international sporting competitions. We're going to be looking at the highest levels of sport throughout most of the semester. And the reason for that is very simple. When we're talking about sponsorship strategy, we're talking about relationships, we're talking about the best examples of how to and how not to engage in sponsorship. Those examples come from the highest levels of sport. Now, if you're interested in nonprofit, not-for-profit, community, low-level amateur sport, whatever it may be, the core ideas, the concepts, the practices that we talk about over the semester, that I present, that we discuss, that we describe, that you will look at in your assignments, will still absolutely apply. The examples might not be as clear. The capacity or ability to manage or funding might not always be there. But at the end of the day, whether you're sponsoring the FIFA World Cup or a local children's soccer association, if done right, sponsorship should be equal. And I make this point for a couple of different reasons. And the first main one is because of the way that we describe sponsorship or the course in the university's calendar. And that calendar description here specifically refers to looking at the management and delivery of the sports sponsored exchange process. This is a hugely outdated way of looking at sponsorship, thinking of sponsorship as purely the exchange that exists between a sponsor and a sponsee. And while the second part of that description, branding, acquisition, assessment, evaluation, are all elements that we'll look at, this idea of an exchange is one that, from top to bottom in the sport industry, from the highest levels of professional international sport all the way down to the lowest levels of amateur community sport, we need to be looking beyond. And my focus here will be to look at how we create, construct, and think about sponsorship relationships from a strategic perspective. How do we apply and inform management principles within these relationships? And how do we develop sponsorship in a way that is meaningful? And the way we're going to do that over the course of the semester will obviously be through regular lectures. And if you have a look at the syllabus, the course structure will look to balance weeks out a little bit between lectures pretty much every Wednesday, and then cases, which are part of your major group projects that will be splashed here and there on Fridays to balance out what we're talking about in terms of theory and practice, giving you a chance to apply what we're learning towards your group project, and also just to have a bit of a break from listening to me talk. Some of the really nitty-gritty stuff, the boring stuff from the course outline, my email address is there. On the course outline, there's also my office phone number, which you're welcome to call, but I can't promise I'll ever actually answer. If you need to get in touch with me at any time, including while I'm away for this conference, feel free to hit me up by email anytime. That's also my Teams handle if you'd like to meet virtually. My office hours are going to be immediately after our classes on Wednesdays from 11:30 to 12:30, but I'm also available by appointment more or less anytime. If you cannot make that office hours time, email me, come meet with me after class, whatever it is, we'll set up a time. I'm happy to work around your schedules as best as possible. We have two TAs for the semester, Emma Hatfield and Claudia Murphy, who will be handling much of the grading for the course of the semester. You shouldn't have any cause or need to get in touch with either of them. Any questions you have about assignments, about exams, about grading, any chance you would like to have to review any of your assignments or deliverables, come to me first, please and thank you. Their emails are there should anything require their attention that I'm not able to address, or if there's anything you need to talk to them about specifically. But otherwise, I'm your go-to person on this, and hopefully I'm able to answer and address any questions or concerns you might have. But more importantly, hopefully I'm able to alleviate any concerns, and we can have a great semester without having to worry about bothering a couple of graduate students who are doing their damnedest to finish their projects. Now, a couple little extra bits here. The way in which we're going to do all of this, and the way in which I'm hoping to see through this semester, and I'm hoping that you'll see through this semester as well, is to highlight and identify first and foremost the theory that underpins sponsorship, as well as the practical applications of those. And I'm going to attempt to do this and try to manufacture the course in such a way that content is consistently presented within context. And you'll find over the course of the semester that I will use as many pictures and videos and examples and cases as I possibly can to be able to illustrate what it is we're talking about. Sponsorship theory itself is really interesting, but it's also quite high level, and it requires an understanding of certain elements of marketing that maybe we haven't quite covered yet through your course so far. So I'm going to look to try to apply those practical strategies as best I can to show how and why and where what we're learning can be actually seen and manifested in practice. Part of doing that is also to be able to provide broader context and think about how sponsorship fits within the business and marketing of sport, the role that it plays for the different stakeholders that it plays, and to think about those different stakeholders and their needs on a different level. And then lastly, more of a challenge for you as a class, I'm hoping and expecting that over the course of the semester to develop your abilities to not only think critically, but also creatively about the roles and relationships that sponsorship, that marketing, and that sport play. One of the major differentiating factors for successful marketers, sponsored marketers especially, sport managers more generally, is their ability not only to identify critically challenges that may be faced, but to also identify creative opportunities to address those challenges. And when we think about how sponsorship exists and the way in which we'll discuss sponsorship over the course of the semester, I want you to think critically about what we talk about, what I'm saying, what you're reading. And I want you to think creatively in especially your group projects about how we actually address and answer those challenges. Two more quick little bits from the syllabus. Some of the major important dates you're going to want to need to know over the course of the semester. First off, the week after reading week, February 26th, will be your midterm, which is worth 25% of your grade. And there will be a final exam during the examination period, also worth 25% of your grade. 10% will go towards ongoing participation and engagement. My expectation is at the beginning of every class, especially on Wednesdays when we're doing lectures, I'm going to open the floor and ask for a quick in the news, essentially, of what's happening in sponsorship and sport marketing. Participation will be monitored here. My expectation is that over the course of the semester, everyone will be able to participate and engage. The other part of participation engagement will come from deliverables that will be related to the cases over the course of the semester on the different Fridays, in which we will have in-class examples and group project related activities that will be equally graded. The final 40% of your grade will come from your group assignments, which will be divided into two parts, each worth 20%. Part 1 due on the 14th of February, Part 2 due on the 28th of March. I'll talk much more about these when we return to class in week 2. We'll go over in your first sort of case session on the second Friday, going over what exactly this group assignment will look like and how it will all come together. But I do want you to take note of the quick little asterisk part at the bottom there. There is a peer evaluation component to both parts. There's an expectation that you will contribute to your group and work hard as a group. These will be groups of up to 5 students maximum per group. So if you know others in the class already, if you know that you have friends who are in the cohort who you want to work with, feel free to start putting those groups together now, or any time between now and when we sit down for our first case day. Otherwise, if you don't know of anybody, or if you don't have the time, or just want to relax for the first little week here, we'll make sure that everybody gets set up in a group as soon as we're back to in-person classes. Last little bit from the course outline before you all fall asleep. There are required readings on Brightspace for every week. If you have a look, read those before class. What I talk about in sessions will make much more sense if you're following along. I've tried to balance out kind of boring theoretical journal articles and book chapters with more practical examples. So typically every week there will be one journal article or book chapter, and then 1 or 2 actual public, popular press news stories about what's happening in the world that hopefully will be relevant for you. Assignment guidelines I will make available when I'm back in person and when we're able to go through everything together in class. Keep an eye out on Brightspace for those. Everything will basically be done digitally, aside from maybe the group projects, and through Turnitin. So if you have any issues with that, let me know. 20% late penalty, yada, yada, yada. You've all heard this stuff before. Medical exemption policy is all online. The important bit, the fun bit. What we're talking about when we talk about sponsorship here is, like I say, a really unique relationship that exists between multiple partners. In sponsorship marketing, we're talking about kind of the fun ads that you might see around the Olympics or that you might see on the boards at a hockey game. The sponsorship strategy would be the reasoning behind why would you sponsor that event, or why would you target that arena or that team. There are any number of different variables that go into making sponsorship strategic and that make sponsorship relationships meaningful for us. And in truth, we won't be able to cover all of it over the course of this semester. I'm not even going to try to. What we are going to try to do is understand and really dive into how and why sponsorship matters and works for you as sport managers. And my hope and my expectation here is that you'll all leave the class in April in love with sponsorship and thinking it's the coolest and most fun idea and part of sport. The reality that I'm very much aware of is that most of you will not work in sponsorship or marketing in the future. You have other interests. You might be interested in human resources or in finance or the law or events, or you might not want to work in sport anymore. That's all okay. Sponsorship encompasses and requires an understanding from every element of the business. And unlike pretty much any other course that you'll take in SPMA, has applications both for the sport organizations, the sponsees, as I said, as well as for organizations operating outside of sport. Whether we're talking about those third-party intermediaries, so if you want to work for a sponsorship agency or a marketing broker, or for brands, if you wanted to go work for a Molson or a Coors or a Budweiser or a Nike. Sponsorship encompasses such a broad spectrum of stakeholders that there is something here for everyone. But even outside of that, we're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking about the management of relationships and of fit and of how we build and develop those relationships. So even outside of the sponsorship context, my hope and expectation is that you will find something of relevance that you can apply in other fields, whether you're negotiating a rental for a facility or you are trying to develop out your ability to generate sales. There will be application here if you look for it. And if you don't see it, and if you struggle to see it at times, please let me know. Where you will see it very much is in the actual application of sponsorship. And for the purposes of this course and the way in which we're going to establish and discuss sponsorship, I wanted to bring to your attention this definition, which will guide our first few weeks and really kind of be the platform upon which we build what strategic sponsorship is. Chadwick and Thwaites describes sponsorship as a long-term relational association involving established, strong, or clear links between a property and a sponsor, which is defined by the terms of a legal contract with goals being to secure both a direct financial return and indirect and network returns. It's a bit of a mouthful, I'll acknowledge, but there are some really important parts of this. We'll just dive a little bit deeper into these in week 2 as well, but I want you to look at the bolded bits. Long-term relational association. Now, long-term doesn't necessarily have to mean we're talking about sponsorship agreements that last a decade or more, but rather think of these as relationships that extend beyond simply an ad hoc exchange. This isn't a one-time, here's the cash, where does my logo go? This is a relationship that is built over weeks or months or years. This is a relationship that involves, at minimum, 2 properties. The property, or the sport enterprise, or the sponsee, and the sponsor. And what is exchanged or created in this relationship is defined by a contract where both parties benefit. And those both parties benefit through an exchange of either payment in cash or value in kind, in exchange for rights of marketing and association that can build out either direct financial returns or other associated business-to-business, network, or indirect dyadic returns. There's a lot to unpack there, but what I want you to think about is how can we create and develop out these relationships in a way that's meaningful from a long-term relationship perspective, and that is guided by goals, objectives, meaningful value for both parties. And why is that important? Well, one of the resources that I provided for you this week on Brightspace is the Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study, which is published every year by T1 Agency and the Sponsorship Marketing Council of Canada, alongside a couple of other partners. And what's on screen here is a quick little snapshot from one of the slides. If you go to that slide deck on page 20, the Canadian industry spend in total for last year, sponsorship accounted for approximately $3.23 billion of investment. And what you'll see in the gray and the reddish pinkish lines are that 3.23 billion is divided almost equally between 2 core components of sponsorship marketing. 1.62 billion goes towards that exchange, essentially the payment that is made between a sponsor and a sport organization. and 1.62 billion goes towards the actual marketing of that association. And that is hugely important in terms of thinking about, one, the size of the industry, which 3.23 billion may not seem like that much, but globally we're talking about the investment alone in sports sponsorship being worth north of $65 billion. The overall sponsorship marketing industry globally is worth over $150 billion. Two, from a Canadian sport perspective, think about how much money is invested in our system and invested into our sports properties, and what our sponsors are expecting out of that for their north of $3 billion investments in our properties and in our worlds. Now, as I say, much of what I speak about over the course of this semester will be related to the highest levels of sport. I will try to balance out major events, major leagues, as well as trying to build in and speak to nonprofits and not-for-profit organizations, community sport. But many of the examples that we'll look at and we'll speak to will be related to the major properties, simply because of the visibility that they provide, the best practice that we can see there, as well as, in some contexts, the worst practice. If ever you don't understand the examples I'm providing, you can't relate to them, I talk about sports or leagues or organizations that you're not familiar with, my request to you coming into week 2 and leaving today is that you make this course what you want it to be and what you need it to be in order to understand best the content that I'm describing and that we're discussing, and that you are able to succeed to the best of your ability. So when I talk about the Olympics, or when I talk about Angel City FC, if you need to know more about those in order to understand those examples, let me know. But if you are interested in the lower levels of sport, and I don't say that in a mean way or in a way to belittle those sports, but if you're more interested in indie music festivals or community sport or nonprofit sport, my intent in highlighting commercial sport is not to demean or diminish sponsorship at those levels, but rather to highlight how best we can apply and practice the highest levels of sponsorship at those levels, and think about what we can learn from the Olympics, the World Cup, from the NHL or NFL, to make your local sport organization stronger and to make those relationships more meaningful. And if we think about those relationships in a way that is strategic, if we think about them as relationships rather than as merely a source of revenue or funding, then we can develop out stronger music festivals or kids sports organizations or national sport federations in a way that will drive the industry forward and provide you the best opportunities for success in the future. Now, saying all that, there are a couple of other resources that I've provided online for you. I don't expect you to read everything through, but on Brightspace right now, there is IEG's Guide to Sponsorship. That's the International Events Group's Guide to Sponsorship. It's a few years old. It's a little bit dated, so the numbers aren't necessarily up to date, but some of the definitions and ideas of what sponsorship is and how it works can be a really useful resource for you over the course of the semester. That Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Report is online as well. I'll refer to that a number of times over the coming weeks. Again, I don't expect you to read it intimately, but it's there if you want to have an additional resource to understand what sponsorship looks like here closer to home. What I am expecting and hopeful of you to watch this week is a mini documentary news report from the Financial Times on YouTube that I provided the link to, which is called Following the Money Behind Premier League Betting Sponsors. This is available to you. Watch it this week. It's something we'll talk about over the coming weeks, particularly in light of where the course is headed in terms of the ideas of relationships, the idea of strategy, and especially the idea of meaning. Gambling sponsorship is very much in vogue at the moment. It's something that is pervasive. It is becoming in equal points less regulated and more regulated as we are more aware of what's happening, but it's also one of the most problematic areas of sport and highlights some of the challenges that we face. The video that I provided a link to speaks to the English Premier League's reliance on gambling sponsorship and the problems that that has created. The need for money in sport, and especially at the highest levels of sport, has meant that identifying and finding sources for that revenue can be at times fraught with challenges and difficulties. We're seeing the same thing happen in North America. You see sports books and gambling organizations becoming more and more involved, and it's impossible to watch a sporting broadcast today without being inundated with gambling lines. And for many of you, that may be great. And in and of itself, gambling and sports books aren't problematic. But understanding the impact they have on sponsorship is. And thinking about sponsorship as something more, and thinking about sport organizations as something more, is a thread that I'd like us to pick up after this week. So please watch that video. Take the half hour over the course of the week. Sub in the time that we would otherwise be sitting together in class. And we'll come back in week 2 and discuss. So with that, thank you very much for listening in today and for watching that YouTube video over the course of the week. I apologize again that I couldn't be here in person to meet you all and to get started properly this week. I look forward to seeing you all on the 15th in class to get started in earnest. On Wednesday, we will have our first proper lecture. So January 15th, we'll start with sponsorship structures and looking at the different forms and ways in which sponsorship exists and looking at some of the practical applications that sponsorship takes on in industry. And then on Friday, the 17th, we'll have our first case week looking at the group project, quickly going over what that project is, getting people set up in groups and facing forward for that major project over the course of the next 12 weeks. And those 12 weeks will start to take shape. We're going to look at sponsorship in a number of different contexts, thinking about it as art, as science, as management, and importantly throughout all as relationships. Thank you again, and I apologize again for not being here this week. I hope you all have a safe and happy first week back. Enjoy the time, and I look forward to seeing you in week 2. Take care.